the Clippers, looking to win the first championship in franchise history, lost last night to the Minnesota Timberwolves. They are now in 6th place. And again, we not to, hammer home the point too much, but Phoenix right now with 29 losses, OKC in 13th place with 33 losses, as does LA. But you look at 6 through 11, Clippers have 31 losses, Dallas has 31, and then Minnesota, Utah, New Orleans, and Portland all have 32. So much intrigue over the last 20 games of the season. And so let's kind of assess where we think the Clippers are right now. Because a lot of people, and I'm one of them, think that they still, despite a mediocre record, and by the way, a mediocre record, even over the last 23 games, Kawhi has played in 20 of those, just 12-8 when he plays now. 3 losses in a row since they got Russ. They're in some ways a hard team to figure out.
As of this morning, they're, according to NBA.com, they're 20th in offense and 12th in defense. Disappointment may be a little strong. I mean, this is a team that's going to be in the playoffs, but are you a little surprised at where they sort of stand metrically, as we are now in March?
I am, and it's weird, Tommy, because if you look at their season, because this is a team that I've been tracking the whole season, it's a team that, it's a team that I stay up for, especially if Kawhi's gonna play. It's a team that I like to watch. They started out the season really good offensively. Really good defensively. They were a top 5 defense for the first part of the season. Really bad offensively. And that paradigm has shifted and just completely reversed. So I use January 8th because that's when Kawhi really started to play well. It's also when his minutes went up. So since January 8th, they are 12-11. In those 20 games of those 23 games that Kawhi has played, they're 12-8. They have the 4th best offense over that stretch and the 22nd best defense. And one of the things, if you watch them, and by the way, Ben Taylor of Thinking Basketball has a great 15-minute video on the Thinking Basketball YouTube channel. I would highly recommend to watch it. It breaks down the Kings-Clippers game that went into double overtime, second highest scoring game of all time. But it breaks it down, and it shows how difficult it is really to get stops, given the amount of space and given the amount of ball handling and shooting that's on the floor. But one thing that you take away from that, and if you have watched the Clippers, you can see this. The point of attack. Ty Lue said this to me Sunday night when I interviewed him pregame with Ryan Rucco. Their point of attack defense, their ability to contain the basketball is poor. And against the Kings, as of right now, their matchup in the first round, they have problems containing De'Aaron Fox. And I don't think Russ is the answer for that. So is it Paul George? Is it Kawhi? You're asking a lot of those guys to try to contain De'Aaron Fox. The other point I wanted to make on that video, but this is a breakdown that I've seen over the last 2 months defensively. They have played small a lot of times, especially if Zubac is out of the lineup like he's been. They have communication issues. And again, I don't think Russ solves those communication issues. So when they're switching, especially off the ball, they give up a lot of open looks. And we saw that in the Kings game. Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray. There's a lot of point switching, right? So that to me is the 2 issues defensively. And look, I think Ty Lue is a great coach. I think their guys want to win, and I think they're like trying to be engaged. But at some point, you have to have concerns about them defensively, which is crazy given that we all thought going into the season with the amount of depth and size and length they had, that would be a strength of their team.
One other question I was going to come off of the Kings game, but it's really been an issue for them in their last 3 games, is the turnovers.
Yes.
In the Kings game, they gave up 42 points off turnovers alone, which is the most in the NBA in the last 4 seasons. They have 62 turnovers in their last 3. They actually have been pretty good since January 19th. They were really bad to start the season. They've improved. In the last 3 games, they've kind of regressed to where they were before. Is there something about them specifically that you think is causing this problem? I mean, obviously nobody wants to turn the ball over, but it clearly is hurting the defense as well.
I think in the Paul George Kawhi era, the one thing that has been missing is a true table setter for those guys. Again, you're not going to get Chris Paul for $30 million a year in free agency, so that's out of the question. You're not going to get Tyus Jones. Like the low turnover point guards, those guys are very valuable. And Terrence Mann has played point at times. They now have Russ. Russ is a high turnover guy. He's always been a high turnover guy. We shouldn't be surprised by that. I think a lot of Clippers fans right now are talking about Paul's turnovers. And he had a couple in that Kings game that were particularly befuddling. But I was looking PG over his last 17. So same date, right? That January 8th date. He's played in 17 of the 23 games. 23 a game, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 48-38 shooting splits, 1.4 steals, 3 turnovers a game. I'm not saying that's inconsequential, but for a higher usage player, that's fairly normal. Overall, they're 18th in turnover percentage. But yeah, some of that is just not having that sort of natural point guard to get you into sets and to sort of control the game in the half court. Here's an interesting thing about the Clippers. On DraftKings Sportsbook, they have the most amount of bets to win the Western Conference. The most amount of bets. But only 3% of the money. So there's a lot of people that are taking a little bit of a, $20, $5, whatever it may be.
A flyer.
Yeah, but I mean, the crazy thing is they have the third best odds. So the odds are not like in your favor to play small bets. The Nuggets have the most handle, the most money bet on them to win the Western Conference. And then it's Clippers at 21% of the bets. You've got the Warriors 19, Nuggets 18, Phoenix 16. That seems right to me in terms of the top 4 teams. I do find it fascinating that they have the most amount of money, the Clippers do, the most amount of money on them or most amount of bets on them to win the Western Conference, yet they're not in the top 10 for most amount of bets placed on them to win the championship. That seems very weird to me. They're 12th, despite having the 5th best odds to win the NBA championship. Where do I see them right now, Tommy? I think they're outside looking in terms of being a tier 1 team. We're going to see, hopefully tonight, it's been reported, KD's going to play tonight. Hopefully tonight we see the first version of this Phoenix Suns team. They're in 4th. Golden State, let's give them some props here. After last night's comeback win in Portland, they're now in 5th place. Reports yesterday that Steph Curry is going to be back sooner than later. All of a sudden, you're like, man, with what Phoenix did, with how Sacramento's playing, obviously Memphis, of course, Denver, those top 6 teams in the West, I mean, those series are going to be bloodbaths.
Yeah, it's tough, and it seems like the Clippers. I mean, I know they added a bunch off the bench. We talked about that last week, but they just have a lot to figure out compared to some of these other teams who seem to have their identity already. I wanted to ask about Kawhi.
Yeah.
In particular, we talk about this with Paul, and even though they lost against the Kings, I mean his numbers were insane. What have you seen from him from the game the other night? What have you seen from him in particular over the last 2 or 3 weeks as he's rounding back into kind of like cyborg Kawhi form?
What gives me hope for the Clippers, having faced off against Kawhi 3 times in the playoffs, 15 in the first round when he was with the Spurs, 19 with the Raptors. And then, of course, I was hurt with Dallas. But his Game 6 performance when they're down 3-2 in Dallas, and Texas had different protocols for fans in stadiums, that was a full 21,000 raucous crowd that night. And he went 18 of 25 for 44 points. So what gives me hope for the Clippers is that you have a 2-time Finals MVP who is peaking. Look, I think all the numbers are great with Kawhi, 28 points a game, 52% from 3, or 52% from the field, 49%. Floor game, great. Over the last 37 minutes a game. The fact that he played Friday night, played 46 minutes, comes back, has a great game in Denver, plays more minutes last night. Like, to me, how they've managed him, they've put him in a position now to be peaking in the playoffs. The one guy that, is intriguing to me, and I mentioned him, is Terrence Mann. And one of the things that Ty Lue told us before the game, and this was not like for private, so I'm not sharing something that he probably hasn't already said to the Clippers media, is that once they got Russ and they got Bones Hyland, they got Eric Gordon, they got Mason Plumlee, his thinking for this stretch coming out of All-Star break is to tinker a little bit with rotations and try to figure out what he's got. My hope is that Terrence Mann doesn't get lost in the shuffle, and we don't see 15-minute games from Terrence Mann down the stretch and in the playoffs, because I think he's very valuable defensively, and I also think with the way he shot the ball lately, he's another floor spacer. Which look, that's not Russ's game. I think Russ has been great so far for them in the 3 games. The 9 assists particularly stand out. Again, high turnover guy. He's got 4.3 turnovers in the 3 games. But they've got some things to figure out. What I think they don't have to figure out is Kawhi. That to me is very clear.
I remember after that game, we didn't have time to talk about this with Paul. After that game, the game 6 in Dallas, you were like, that's Michael Jordan.
I said that the Toronto year too. Early in the season. So he goes from San Antonio. He's coming off that injury where he was out a long time. And he goes and, they're load managing him in San Antonio or whatever. And early in that season, I was texting a buddy who works for a team in the NBA. And we were like, is Kawhi, in terms of the mid-range precision, the way he gets to his spots, his post-game, it's the closest thing. I mean, of course, Kobe, but it's the closest thing in current players, I think, to Michael Jordan. That mid-range area, and that's what he's doing right now. So there is hope for the Clippers, but with 18 games to go for them, they definitely have some things to figure out. NBA fans, it's time to bring the hoops action to the palm of your hand with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. This week, new customers can download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up with code JJ. Right now, you can bet $5 on any pregame moneyline bet and get $150 in bonus bets if your team wins. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code JJ. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details.